Greetings adventurers, my name is Kramer. It is good to be back, and I am back with a video that may save your life. Okay, I may be exaggerating a little bit, but water is life. Water is very important, especially if you are on a journey where you may not know where your next source of water is coming from. It is important to carry some with you. So I recently returned from a lovely trip to Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, in the United States, where I got this leather bottle. And while I was there, I was struck by the number of different designs, different shapes, and different sizes of leather bottles that there actually are. And it sort of got me thinking, what would each one of these bottles be used for? Is there a particular reason that you would want a specific shape? And unfortunately, this is one of those videos where I've come up short in my research. I was able to find precious little about why different bottles were shaped the way they are. In fact, if anything, what I found was that people just made bottles out of leather because it was convenient, and it was an easy thing to make, and they just used them for whatever they needed to be used for. So unfortunately, I wasn't actually able to find information on the history of bottles that I really wanted to, so I'm gonna leave that down to the comments section and the historians below, and maybe even some of the bigger channels that might be better equipped logistically or historically to answer the question of why bottles were shaped the way they are throughout the centuries of our past. Channels such as Shadiversity or Modern History TV, Mr. Jason Kingsley, Sir Jason Kingsley, if you're watching, why are bottles shaped the way they are? So, as I've already established in this video right here, having leather drinking ware was an absolute occurrence in the medieval period. These were called blackjacks, mostly because they are black by virtue of their process of being made. They're waxed on the outside, and sometimes there's beeswax on the inside, sometimes there's brewer's pitch on the outside, and they ended up oftentimes being black. And these were used pretty much by everyone in every social status, at least as far as I've seen in the 16th century, so 1500s. There are a number of examples of both cups and bottles that have been found on the Mary Rose. And of course, much, much earlier, though shapes are difficult to tell, and the further back you go, the more the leather is going to deteriorate. So there haven't been as many historical finds as I've really wanted to see. In fact, in addition to not really being able to define what the different shapes and sizes were used for or why they existed the way that they did, I also wasn't able to even find like a concrete definition for what the difference between a canteen, a costrol, or just a regular bottle was. The terms are used essentially interchangeably, at least in every article that I saw, and all of them are kind of just another word for bottle or container or vessel. The only thing that I saw, which is interesting to me, is actually that a costrol is shaped like this. This is a find from the Mary Rose. They resemble sort of a barrel shape. And when I was purchasing this bottle and trying to decide, like, did I want this shape? Did I want what I now, I guess, understand to be the costrol shape? I asked what each of them was used for. And the answer that I received was that this one would be for water and the costrol shape would have been used for wine because it actually resembles the wine bottles of the time period. Now, keep in mind, I was buying this at Colonial Williamsburg, so 18th century. So things might have been used for different purposes back in medieval Europe, but there are definitely accounts of them being used to carry water, but ultimately I decided on this one. The interesting thing about costrals of this shape is that they actually had much shorter carrying straps, and you would actually wear them on your belt rather than on a strap like over your shoulder, so they would be very compact. My thinking about a bottle like this is that it's probably a little bit easier to sit down or ride on horseback with something like this, whereas a longer bottle is gonna start to get in the way because it's going down the length of your torso, whereas a shorter thing may be easier to carry. I haven't tested it. I don't have one. They were very expensive. So before I get into a couple of the various shapes that I have and how I personally use them with no historical precedent at all, other than just some common sense, why? Why use leather bottles like this when there are so many other options available, even if you were going to something like a Renaissance fair or you are going to a LARP or even just like on a general hike and you wanted to dress in garb, why use these? And my answer for that is because I have tried the method where I essentially made like a cloth bag that goes over one of those modern metal water bottles. A water bottle just like this one, actually. Stainless steel. As you can see, it does in fact have the Living Anachronism logo on the front of it. And this, as well as t-shirts and even banners, are available through my Teespring. The link is in the description if you'd like to help support the channel, along with the link to my website, livinganachronism.com, where we have lots of handmade wooden goods that an adventurer might find him or herself needing. And hopefully very soon, we'll have leather goods as well. Maybe even bottles. back to the video, because the woman who is now my wife wanted that when we went to a LARP because it held the amount of water that she wanted and that she knew she needed to drink daily. And that ended up being difficult to carry. If you are casing something in fabric that is much heavier, it's not got a lot of structural integrity, any sort of straps, you're putting a lot of stress on the fabric. At that point, we're talking about just essentially covering a metal water bottle in leather anyway in order to give it the ability to be like carried on a strap like one of these. So these, you might as well just get a leather water bottle at that point. They're nice and light, they're easy to repair as well, and they are still very durable by virtue of being hardened and waxed leather. The average person is supposed to drink around 8 cups of water a day. So that's the first bit of information you need. If you know you drink more or you know you drink less, that is important data when it comes to choosing the size of water bottle you should be carrying. This all sounds very obvious because it's like water, but you know the number of times a person like just forgets to drink water a day? So maybe it's not that obvious. So for instance, I know that I don't drink enough water per day, but I know that when I'm going out on say a camping trip or something like that, I want to be carrying as much water as is possible. Sometimes we've even like carried in like 5-gallon jugs of water just to make sure we had enough. You don't realize how much water you're actually using per day, just like when you're in your house, because you turn on the tap and water just comes out and you don't even think about it. But when you're camping, suddenly you realize how much water you actually need for cleaning up around the camp, for cooking, and then of course just for actual drinking. And when you're talking about a bottle like this, it seems kind of big when you're carrying it, but all of a sudden it seems really small when you actually need the water. So the next piece of data you're going to need is the volume, the carrying capacity of the actual bottle itself. It sounds very obvious, and it is very obvious. And sometimes if you're buying online, they will tell you how much the bottle carries, and other times you'll be buying it in person and it will just have a little tag on it about the historical accuracy of the bottle, like this one did, and it doesn't tell you how much it carries, and you just sort of hope that it's enough. So you fill the bottle up and you pour it out into a measuring cup. You pour it into the measuring cup until the measuring cup can hold no more. Then you pour that water out and you continue to fill the measuring cup, and then you have the overall total number once the bottle is empty. So I did that, and I know that this bottle carries 4 cups of water, give or take. So what that data means is 1 bottle of water will get you through half a day, which means that you have to be able to fill the bottle at least twice a day so that you can have 1 bottle, you drink it, and then you fill it again, and you have the second. And that is just for daily consumption. That does not take into account if you're going to be cooking. That does not take into account if you're going to be cleaning. It does not take into account if you are running around all day and you need to be drinking way more water than that. So my personal opinion is that you should have at least 1 larger water bottle to carry around with you. Now, when it comes to the difference between a larger sized water bottle and a medium sized one, this carries 3 cups, this one carries 4 cups. You're gonna have to fill it the same number of times per day in order to get to that 8-cup maximum. So at that point, it is just personal preference if you want to carry something a little bigger, if you want to carry something a little smaller. And then you have the much smaller ones. This was actually the first real like leather water bottle that I got. It was a gift from a very dear friend of mine. He got it for me while I was playing Robin Hood. And this is what I would define as a flask size. This holds 1 cup, which is obviously not enough for an entire journey, but something this size is excellent if you know you're just going on a short walk, you're just going on a short expedition, and then you're going back to main camp. And you can see I've actually taken the strings off of this one, even though it's got the holes punched in it, because I'm thinking that I'm gonna carry this the same way that these Kostrels were carried, where instead of it goes on a cord and like goes around my shoulder or something, it actually is gonna go right here on my belt. I'm gonna figure out some sort of toggle system just so I can take it off, drink a little bit of water, and then be on my way. And so this is an important principle in adventuring. It applies to water bottles, but it should apply to your whole kit, and it's something that modern militaries use a lot of the time for their soldiers in the field, and that is to have essentially 3 kits. You have your journeying kit, which is everything. You have your scouting kit, which is what you would need for maybe 2 to 3 days just out in the field without anticipating combat. And then underneath everything, you have your combat kit. And that is when everything extraneous comes off, it's do or die right now, everything else falls by the wayside, and it's just what you need in order to fight and get out of the situation or finish the fight or whatever it is. And so, in the case of water bottles, here's my hypothesis. You should be carrying 1, perhaps even 2 large ones if you have the space in your pack or on your body, and then 1 small one like this flask. This is part of the combat kit, because you're gonna want water mid-combat, and you're not always gonna have like someone bringing you water unless you're in like a pitched battle and there's someone whose job it is to like do that. So this absolutely came in handy in a couple of LARP battles where I just like had it on my side. I needed water real quickly. This is enough to get through a couple of hours, perhaps even shorter like a skirmish or something like that. But back at camp, when you're going back to base, you want a larger bottle with you. If you know you're gonna be hiking for multiple days, you want a larger bottle with you. And when it comes to carrying a larger water bottle like this, you might be able to find a way to wear it on your hip. It's probably gonna feel more stable, but it's long enough on my torso that it's hitting up into my thigh. So water bottles like this that are too big for you to really wear on your waist, which I think is more or less an ideal place to put it if you are able to. If you have to use the cords like this, and I really would not recommend like trying to get into combat wearing it like this. This is just for convenience of walking around and traveling. What I found is that if I shorten it, so that when I wear it, it almost sits right underneath my armpit, sort of where a shoulder holster would sit. So it's very comfortable for me. It's very intuitive for me. This is a good place to keep it. It stays nice and close to your body. It swings around a little bit, but not nearly as much if it was just sort of dangling and hanging around everywhere. That will get annoying as you are hiking around, trust me. So you carry it much closer to your body, up into the armpit as much as possible. And this is still enough length here that I could open the bottle up and still take a drink from it without having to take the whole apparatus off. When you purchase a bottle, it's going to come probably with a standardized size of strap. It's easier for production and it's going to fit more people. And you can see how much this is going to move around, especially if it's actually filled with water. Then it's heavy, there's a lot of weight, it's not very stable. Do not recommend doing that. If you pull it up into your armpit, this is a part of real estate on the body that is not often used when you are doing a medieval kit. So this is a prime place to put it because it's not going to get in the way of anything else. And what you do when you want to resize it is you just take the front section, you pull it far forward so that the bottle is up where you want it to be, close off that bite, and then you can just tie a knot right there and it's going to sit exactly where you want it to. You could also just untie it and cut it to the length that you wanted, but because I think that modularity is very important when it comes to adventuring gear, I'm going to use the tie method, or maybe come up with some sort of toggle method so it's faster to get on and off, simply because there may be situations where I find that I want to have a longer strap and I'll regret cutting it. And the same principle is even with a medium-sized bottle. In fact, this one sort of tucks right in very comfortably right there. It's barely in the way and it feels nice and safe and secure. I think I just lost my cork. And that brings us to the final, and I think in terms of like LARPing and Renaissance fairs, a very ubiquitous style of leather bottle, which is the modern Boda. This is like the closest thing that we have in the modern day to a leather bottle that is still like being manufactured and produced by various companies. It is obviously not actually leather, it's lined with some sort of plastic. But these are pretty easy to get. They're cheap. If you are still doing business with Amazon after what they did to the Lord of the Rings, you can get them there. I wouldn't recommend it. But these things are pretty easy to come by. These are called Bodas. They don't look the most historically accurate with the plastic cap and everything, but there are tutorials on the internet about how you can actually take all that off, replace it with a wooden stopper or a cork, and it looks a little bit more realistic. But the way that these are worn, very similar to how I'm suggesting other types of leather bottles be worn, is also up here in the armpit. This one's a little big on me, but again, you can just tighten it up and it does fit exactly right there in the arm. Here is why I'm not the biggest fan of these personally, and this is all personal preference. I don't like that it's so malleable. It does have some benefits in that it takes up less physical space underneath your arm because it does sort of bend. It might be a little bit more comfortable. The problem is with these, it's like a balloon. It's a very strong balloon, but they can burst if you sit down really hard on one, even if you roll over on one in your sleep. I did that once. It was like freezing outside, so I kept my water bottle in my sleeping bag with me to keep the bottle from freezing over, and I accidentally rolled over it, and now it's ruined. These are also slightly more difficult to fill, again, because they don't have any structure to them, so even with a sink faucet, they don't hold their shape like at all. I think something like this is going to last much longer than this will. So historically, there's evidence for pretty much every shape you can think of, from ones that don't make any sense to very standardized ones to ones that look like modern canteens that we're used to today that are like just a full circle. It really seems to be dealer's choice, maker's choice, buyer's choice. Smaller ones like this that I am referring to from now on as a flask, you could actually use as a flask if you wanted to and keep just a wee nip or a wee dram in one of these, and this one can be for water. So there's a lot of variants. I really think that this is just a case of human beings needed a way that they could carry around liquids with them. This is the way that they decided to do it. Decorate them. I think that's what it is, just based on the fact that I haven't been able to find anything about why bottles were shaped the way they are. When I think about it, it's actually very similar to swords and how the word sword might have been used in period. Sword would have just simply meant sword, and then you have a longer sword, you qualify it as long sword. You have a bottle, you just call it a bottle. It really doesn't matter what shape it is. So maybe that is what we're doing. Maybe someone can create the typology of leather water bottles. In the Lord of the Rings, we know that they do actually have water bottles. They're called water bottles. Tolkien just uses the word bottle, but in this light, we actually don't know exactly what that means. What did they look like? I'm assuming that they were leather. I think he might describe them as leather. I'd have to check the books again. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do know that he calls them water bottles. We know that Frodo and Sam fill them occasionally on their journey to Mordor, and the closer they get to Mordor, the more difficult it is for them to fill their water bottles because fresh water ceases to exist and it starts to become tainted. And it might be really interesting to know, just for research purposes, how many times Frodo and Sam actually are able to refill their water bottles compared to the amount of time that they're actually journeying. So that would require someone to go back through the books and find all the sections where Frodo and Sam are described as filling their water bottles. But if someone has that information offhand for some reason, or wants to go back and find that information, go ahead and comment it below and I will pin the comment because I actually really want to know. The other thing to consider when deciding if you would like to purchase a leather water bottle is not just like the aesthetic shape or the volume, but also how it's physically constructed. This one is 2 pieces of leather that have been sewn together to form a seam that goes all the way around the edge, and it's essentially just a leather bag that's been hardened and can hold water. It doesn't stand up though, whereas this one, which has like an actual flat bottom, will stand up. And for that reason, this one is probably the one that I will be taking with me on various journeys, just because it'll be slightly more convenient in addition to holding slightly more water. But this one does, I think, fit a little bit better right underneath the arm. So it's kind of a toss-up. This one also has welts pretty much everywhere. If you're not familiar, a welt is essentially a third piece of leather that goes in between 2 layers to help create even more surface area, and it's just a little bit more waterproof. Lots of very good shoes are made with welts as well to make them waterproof. It's called a Goodyear welt. And so this one has a lot of those, whereas this one, it's just the seam. So this one is potentially going to need to be refurbished, rewaxed more often than this one is, just based on the way it's made. Same thing with my lovely little flask here. There's no welt or anything. It's just the 2 pieces of molded leather that have then been put together. A fascinating thing that I learned, if you want just a little historical tidbit that probably no one's going to care about or notice if you have a leather bottle, is that apparently if you have holes punched for a round cord to hang your water bottle with, that is in the later periods, more 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, maybe 1600s is even too early. But earlier, they would have simply a slit cut and a flat strap to carry instead of the round holes. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's because it's easier to just cut a slit, but it's not that much harder to punch a hole. So I don't know. Interesting fact though. The final thing to consider when you are choosing the proper style of water bottle is the length of your sword. If you are going to wear it, like I am suggesting, up here under the armpit, is your sword going to bounce up and hit it? And in this case, it is. The quillin is actually just barely touching and scuffing the bottom of the water bottle, so that means I may have to wear it on this side instead in order to keep it out of the way. If I use the medium-sized brown one, this is no longer as big of a problem. It fits very comfortably just right there, and the sword is not in the way. So it's difficult. If you're gonna buy one of these online, it's difficult to say if it's going to be in the way or not, because you can't actually try it out. And oftentimes if you're going around somewhere, unless you're like at a Renaissance fair and you're happening to see one of these, I haven't seen a lot of water bottles sold at Renaissance fairs actually. Maybe someone can change that. But you essentially need to be wearing a sword if you're going to do that little test. And I can't imagine that's gonna happen very often. So thank you for joining me today. It's great to be back. I'll see you very, very soon. And in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.